I'd like to call the meeting to order and let the record show that we have a quorum. And I'll invite the Deputy Sergeant to bring in the first witness, Mr. Duke Monroe. Chris, one of the things you needed.
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give to this honorable legislative assembly shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Good morning, Mr. Monroe, and thanks again for availing yourself to give evidence before the Public Accounts Committee. And as you are aware, we're dealing with the efficiency and effectiveness of the Utility Regulation and Competition Office on the Office of the Auditor General's report for June 2020. And this morning we're expecting to continue evidence from last week because we literally ran out of time. So thanks for coming, and without further ado, I'll invite Mr. Chris to lead off with the questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Monroe. I just want to say welcome back. I always feel bad when we have to be bringing public servants out sometimes a little bit over the allotted time, but I'm sure you will agree that the work that you do is very important, and as such, it will be very important to the public that we all serve. One of the things that was a little bit off was during one of the witness testimony by Rubis. And one of the things that myself and others on the committee, and also others within the public who have since reached out to me, could not reconcile was the margins on fuel. And one of the things that we were discussing was a pre-COVID price, where I think Mr. Nicholas had mentioned that is about $1.50 US a gallon coming out of the Gulf, which by the time you convert that to UK Imperial gallon, it works out to really $1.50 CI a gallon. We agreed that the based on CUC's testimony, who I know they also track prices using Plus Gulf Coast, that roughly around 15 cents would be for shipping, and by the time you look at the port fees and everything else, you're looking at, we just call it 25 cents just to round it up. So you're talking, and then of course there's 75 cents also for government duty. So we're talking about basically roughly now a landed cost of roughly $2.50 CI. there seems to be a margin that goes on now that carries up to about 4.50, and again, this is pre-COVID, because we understand that during COVID it dropped to about maybe 50 cents a gallon out of the Gulf. What we're trying to reconcile is that $2.50 plus, or that $2.50 margin that goes on. Now, the testimony that we were basically given is that that was because of Cayman's high cost of living. Now, when we start looking at the genesis of cost of living, fuel is one of the major factors. Fuel influences everyone else's cost of living. So to be in a situation where your price push up the cost of living, and then to blame the cost of living as the reason for your price was a little bit kind of off. And I remember, I think it was either yourself or Mr. Dunn was speaking that during one of the sessions that you guys had reviewed some of the prices, reached back out to the provider and basically said that they needed to lower their price, which I think was actually quite commendable based on your work that your office did. So my question to you after saying all of that is, what would OFREG consider to be, and if there is a policy, what would OFREG consider to be a reasonable margin in terms of fuel between landed and then making it ways to the pump? I mean, have you guys done any study and analysis to look at that kind of stuff and say, you know what, this we consider to be reasonable versus we think is excessive? Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe I need to, Duke Monroe, Chief Fuels Inspector and Director of Fuels, OFREG. Thank you for the question. So through you, Mr. Chair, we are currently still looking at what a reasonable market margin in Cayman context is for wholesale and retail prices that is tacked onto that landed cost you just referenced. Currently, those numbers just broadly, they are comparable to our duty rate, and that is gross margins. So we still have to, as they're claiming that their fixed cost, high costs of operating here may be driving up those margins that they currently have. So we are endeavoring to ensure we understand what those are itemized so that we can determine that in this context, in order to allow them to earn for themselves a reasonable margin, what those numbers should be both on the wholesale and the retail level. So at this moment, we don't have a number, but we do believe that there are opportunities for improvement on those margins. We want to arrive there based on evidence, based on detailed analysis. Thank you.
One of the things in your same office is on Mr. Anderson's side that regulates CUC. They have within CUC a formula where any major capital expenditures or anything that CUC is doing as to be those assets or the purchase of those assets as to be approved by OFREG to basically look at what would be a reasonable rate of return for CUC. Now, I have here a copy of the Fuel Market Regulation Law 2017, Law 20 of 2017. And on page 8, the schedule at the back speaks about sectoral providers with significant market power. And they listed 4 of them, and just for the listed in public, I will name all 4. It says, number 1, Rubis Cayman Islands Limited in the automotive fuel market. Sol Petroleum Cayman Limited in the automotive fuel market. Solar Energy Resources, Inc. in the supplies and trading markets for petroleum products. And 4, Home Gas Limited in the liquid petroleum gas market. Well, based on this, it is clear that the law, and the regulations and your office recognizes that both Rubis and Sol have significant market power in those areas. And those market power is also now even further confirmed when we do realize now that when we look at where they're even buying their fuel from, or they're buying their fuel, and even their involvement in the retail market, I think it's even more past significant market power, but rather more like really dominant in those areas. My issue then is looking at the same formula that CUC has in terms of getting that return on their assets, because we do recognize at the end of the day that if you have a business to run and you spend $10 million on doing something, there's also the possibility that that $10 million could have been invested elsewhere, even in mutual funds, stocks, bonds, or whatever, and have made maybe a 5 or 6%, which is we consider more safer. So if you're going to do something within a business, you have to say, well, if I'm going to go this route and I have all of these other risks, then naturally I should be looking to make more, whether it be 8, 9%. I don't know what that number would be. But the point is, one of the things that came out, and between the testimony of Johnny Brown, who is one of the retailers, and also I think also Mr. Nicholas with regards to the number of fuel stations in Cayman, Johnny Brown was of the opinion that there were too many fuel stations, and I think he referenced Barbados, where he said for the past 30 years they've not had one new gas station. And then on the Mr. Nicholas from Rubis, he was basically saying that no, it's fine, they have the right amount. Now, if many of these gas stations are basically being branded either Rubis or Sol, and that is a capital expenditure to go to get them upgraded, naturally for every time they spend $1, they'd be looking to make that 8, 9% or whatever target is that they have. Then my question in all of that is, don't you think at this time, looking back now, if they're using that as their excuse or their reasons for justifying these high prices in Cayman, don't you think we have reached a point now where they need to be far more regulated to the point where off-reg is looking at their capital outlay, approving their capital spend? But either way, it can't be a situation that because we went out and we spent $1 million or $500,000 upgrading a gas station, that now we need to raise the price of fuel because now we have that capital outlay and now we need to make more money on that capital. I mean, at what point do we like draw the line and say, well, this is what that regulatory environment needs to look like?
Thank you, member. So through you, Mr. Chair, in responding, I'm going to take it from two angles in terms of the point you made in reference to the number of gas stations. In 2014, I believe we did what I would call a green paper looking at the number of gas stations in the island in terms of whether we should consider a moratorium. The instinctive thought at that time was that maybe it is, but we looked at broader considerations such as population centers, and if populations are going to be expanding out, all of the gas stations we currently have are somewhat concentrated right now, mainly around Georgetown area. So those were some of the setbacks in terms of really moving forward. But it still remains on the card to look at whether that is something that should be considered for the broader Grand Cayman. And also, if we had put a moratorium, we're essentially going to be cementing the current arrangement we had where the branded ones will continue to maintain those licenses and not allowing other persons to actually get into that space. So that remains under review. It's something that I believe is going to be part of our current assessment. And secondly,
before we move to the second one, just so we're clear, I was not looking at a moratorium on gas stations. And the reason being is that I would very much like to see Refuel or other competitors come in and be given a chance. The issue that I'm raising is, and this goes back again to the wholesalers controlling the retail market, is if they can't invest the capital to own the gas station, then it means that someone else is investing the capital to do so. So it is not an issue of moratorium because I think market forces need to work. It's more to limit them from making these investments and then raising the price of fuel based on the fact that I have made this investment, I know I need this return on my capital, here's my payback period, and as such, I'm going to increase my margins because they can always use that as a justification. What we want to see is discouraging them from building more gas stations and getting into more retail business and encouraging other people to get into the business and more get into the white pump where people can buy from either boat either or, whichever they prefer. But that is really what it is that we're looking for, and that's the trainer thought I'm looking at. So just so that there's no confusion or anything like that.
No problem. Thank you, committee member, for clarifying. So through you, Mr. Chair, so the second element is indeed to that point in terms of the vertical integration of these entities participating in the wholesale, what is currently referred as the wholesale market and the retail segment. That also, I must credit, the ministry had looked at this some time back, and there were some setbacks in terms of shifting to that model because there are other elements to this type of decentralized independent ownership that would also place a significant burden on these independent players. The first one, of course, being environmental issues and the licensing, the insurance that may be required. So to shift, the global companies have the advantage of having regional and sort of a more broad-based response to environmental issues if there's a spill, etc. A smaller independent player may actually place that contingent liability on government. So that was just one of the consideration and not necessarily a setback. But
Excuse me, I sorry to interrupt. Did you bring the LCCLs that we requested?
yes, Mr.
Can we have one, please?
Absolutely. I think it's 7 copies. Yes.
Sorry, Chris. Your office, what is your office legal view of what this license authorizes and these companies owning retail outlets?
Mr. Chair, the office has not at this point taken a legal view on their license and what it authorized these entities to do. But on the face of the trade and business license, it says bulk fuel installation, and this is a requirement for the permit we issue to them, and this is the only application they make to us is for their bulk fuel installation. So while they may be participating, as we all are aware, in the other segments of the market, we don't see a trade and business for the retail sites.
Excuse me, Mr. Ronro. In the last 2 finance committees, I personally raised this issue with you and the fuel regulators, right? And you're telling me that over that 4-year period, your office has not seen it sufficient to get a legal opinion on this matter?
Mr. Chair, that would be correct, sir.
What do you all see as your job? Explain to me what you think you should be doing in regulating the business if it does not include the enforcement, the strictest of possible enforcement of the terms and conditions of a license. What is your job?
Mr. Chair, our job is directed by the URC law, the Dangerous Substances Law, and the Fuels Market Regulation Law. The trade and business licensing, for Rubis and Sol, as well as their LCCL, is under the remit of the Department of Commerce and Investment.
Oh, getting back to Chris' question to you last. So, another question. Do you ever finish anything on your desk? Is anything on your desk ever completed?
Mr. Chair, I'm not so sure how to respond to that question.
Ask that question. For the last 4 years, these things have been under consideration. You just made, in response to Mr. Chris's question, you said that the ministry has done something. The whole purpose of off-reg is so the ministry doesn't do it. It is a legal responsibility of off-reg, not the ministry. Off-reg is supposed to advise the ministry. And everything we have asked you about in the last 4 years, that matter is under consideration. Have you concluded the nozzle surveys and implemented the decision on what color nozzles we should have yet?
Mr. Chair, that is concluded. That is part of the consumer protection regs.
So, what color should diesel be at all pumps now?
Mr. Chair, those colors are green for diesel and blue for gasoline.
So how come I just bought diesel at a gas station from a yellow faucet?
Mr. Chair, that is because they have some time. We agreed in the transition to those new colors that there would be a time frame for those colors to be implemented.
How long?
6 months they've asked for.
6 months to change the color on a nozzle? And you were under consideration for 4 years?
Mr. Chair, that matter has been, that matter started in April. We consulted on it. We finalized toward the end of 2019 last year. So that matter has not been under consideration for 4 years.
I know that I questioned you about it in Finance Committee in 2016. So you took from 2016 to April 2019 to start the survey.
Mr. Chair, I don't have any recollection of the discussion in 2016, but you did raise it in a Finance Committee querying where are we on that process, because we
there you see. How could I possibly raise a query of where are you in the process if I hadn't raised it in the previous Finance Committee that it needs to be done?
Mr. Chair, so that discussion came about because of a consultation we did in April of 2019. It was raised both in the House and also via the public social media as to why we are consulting. So the first time that matter came to the fore to the public was when we consulted on it in April of 2019.
You just said I queried it in Finance Committee. There's no Finance Committee in 2019? No, I come to all Finance Committees. The budget for 2017 and 2018 was approved in 2016, the Finance Committee. The budget for 2018 and 2019, was approved in 2017. The budget for 2020 and 2021 was approved in Finance Committee in 2019. Anyway, so your position is that you know that these companies are operating outside the provisions of their LCCL. But your response to that as a regulator is that not your job, that's Commerce job. Have you reported to the Department of Commerce that you have evidence and that you are aware that these wholesale companies are in the retail business in contravention of their business license?
Mr. Chair, we have not taken a very callous view on this matter in terms of the awareness that these entities own other properties in the retail sector. We have not been derelict in our duties in terms of bringing awareness to that for the reason that this has been known for some time, and unless we determine based on evidence that it is not to the benefit of the market, we will then make recommendation to have them divest or otherwise of these properties.
Just so I am clear, and if you, during the course of regulating one of these companies, find that they breached, say, the immigration law or the labor law as a result, because as the primary regulator, you will have access to information and you'll receive information and you'll be able to see information that other government departments wouldn't. So just so we're clear, if in the course of your normal duties of being a regulator, which part of regulatory job is to make sure compliance, not just with your laws, but with all laws, are you basically saying then, if you see where they've broken, say, the immigration law or the labor law, you will not report it because those breaches are not in the law that governs your organization? Just so we're clear.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to clarify, if we are aware of any breaches of any law for the licensees we have, we will report it. We will take action to bring it to the attention of the relevant authorities.
Mr. Monroe, I don't want to find you in contempt, believe me. But you just told me that you don't see it as your responsibility of reporting to the Department of Commerce that you know these people are operating outside the remit of their business license, because that's not your job. As far as you're aware, they know about it. And now you're telling Mr. Chris that you will do it if you find it? It's one or the other. Which is correct?
Mr. Chair, so there is a progression of events leading to this discussion. So if maybe I can clarify. So you were asking about a legal position on whether they are in violation of, Rubis or Sol is in violation of their LCCL. I responded that we have not gotten a legal view on that as to whether they're in violation. So in the absence of that, we could not determine that they are violating their LCCL based on the prima facie evidence we have that their LCCL speaks to a bulk fuel installation and marketing of petroleum product. What I was simply saying is that will be subject to a legal view, a very thorough legal decision for Rubis or Sol, if challenged, with DCI to say that they're restricted. What I would also want to clarify is that after operating in the Cayman Islands for all this time, it is very much known that they do have ownership. What I would like to clarify and make very clear is that if this arrangement goes contrary to effectively regulating them, we will then raise that as an issue to be amended. But to look at the document and say that they're violating the law, I am not in a position to do that, nor do I believe OFREG at this point in time. Thank you.
So you would be the same thing if you found somebody breaking any other law. You would wait to get a legal opinion to solidify your position before you make a recommendation.
Mr. Chair, it would be helpful if you can clarify that you are indicating that that Rubis and Sol are breaking the law, and that's a firm legal view, because I'm not so sure.
It is not my job. I'm not a paid regulator. I'm not getting paid for this. I have an opinion as a citizen that when I read a document, but what is your definition of bulk storage?
Mr. Chair, the definition of bulk storage is storing of fuel in large quantities for further distribution and not for direct sale.
And that definition certainly could never be applied to a gas station on the side of the road to which fuel from the bulk storage is being delivered.
I would concur with that opinion. However, Mr. Chair, marketing of petroleum products can also take on a different view and different interpretation.
No, sir. You can't bend definitions like that. Marketing is a promotional exercise. That could only possibly be the marketing and the promotion of the products in the bulk storage. That's right. There can't be that marketing can be stretched by your regulatory authority or by you to say that because I have a license to market the products that I have in bulk storage, it allows me to retail that product. Is that that's what you're telling me?
Mr. Chair, I'm suggesting that it could be an interpretation, which is probably leading to the dilemma right now in terms of whether Sol and Rubis should not be in the...
Right, sir. I don't know where the dilemma is. Right? The common definition of bulk storage you just gave me cannot possibly be combined with marketing and sales to say that that allows these companies to operate retail outlets. I mean, my grandmother said the school children in China know that. Right? And you're saying that because the opinion of your office is that you don't need to do anything about this because it's known by the Department of Commerce and it's been going on for so long.
Mr. Chair, to reiterate, what I outlined is that when we come to the point in our regulatory duties that this arrangement is not beneficial to the Cayman Islands, we will seek to address it directly.
Let's drill down into that aspect of it now. Following up on Mr. Chris's question, what formula do you apply that the public can have confidence that to this point in time, the fact that these wholesale people own the majority of the retail outlets in this island, to say that if they invest $1 million, $2 million to put in more on pumps and tanks, they cannot raise fuel at the wholesale bulk storage to compensate for that investment.
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, they own, and I believe it's on record that they own a total of about 7 sites, 2 for Rubis and 5, I believe, for Sol, as I think was disclosed to the House. But you are correct in that if they increase their capitalization in the market, it is going to attract an increased return on their investment. What formula we have to restrict them in terms of what they can make, there is no current formula in place to restrict them recovering on that asset. The capitalization increase, the percentage of return that they're expected to get will be the same. It's just over a broader capital base. So I am not sure what specifically you're seeking to be clarified in relation to that, the question.
I think, just to add some clarity, if competition should happen at different levels of the cycle, there should be competition at the wholesale level, primarily between Sol and Rubis, and there should be competition at the retail level between the different dealers. So Rubis and Sol compete, the dealers compete. If Rubis or Sol is coming out of the wholesale market and going into the retail market to give someone either subsidize something or some benefit that the other one is not getting, that is anti-competition, and that is unfair to the dealers within that. So in other words, if, let's say, Rubis decide, or Sol, and they own a gas station, and they decide, you know what, I'm going to keep the margins here on this gas station, probably run it into a loss, because I can make the money back on the back end at the wholesale level. then that is bad for the retail market. And I think that is really where the competition needs to be looked at different levels. Because now, if it is a situation where the wholesalers are completely into the retail market, then the dynamics change. Now, in yesteryears gone by in Cayman growing up, most of those retail gas stations were actually owned by the different individuals. That's the reason why most of them were even given the name of their gas station, whether from Mostyn's come right down to Oses to Browns. That has been a tradition. But so that was the tradition, and they would buy from these guys. The minute they stepped into the retail space, the game changed. Because all of a sudden now, the little margin that you make in the retail space, which is not as much as you make on the wholesale space, has now been jeopardized. So in other words, if I have a new gas station and I just put up a brand new property, and someone has an old property down the road, and you're just selling gas, you cannot expect to realistically sell your gas at the same price and with the same guy who just pretty much has his assets already paid for and everything else. You have more asset costs, you got capital to pay back, you got loan to pay back, and this guy has no loan. It is very difficult for you to compete with him, and that's the reason why we have even seen it in some industries and going back to even telecoms, why when you have the dominant player coming in and you're trying to make it easier for new people coming in, you don't allow these people to exert their dominance. The dominance in the wholesale market have now gone into the retail market. And you cannot foster competition in that way, or believe, which is part of the mandate of your office, to foster competition when the deep pockets are running. Because what you find now, that gas stations such as Medak, who is property owned, Caymanian owned business from long Caymanian family, cannot now compete against these guys who are basically having all the marketing, having all the properties and all of that kind of stuff owned by the bigger guys. You see the smaller guys falling away. And if the small guys who are competing are falling away, then something must be wrong with the process and the structure that we have in terms of how fuel is. And if there's no space between, if you can't distinguish between the wholesale market and the retail market, then you have to basically regulate the entire market, because they have now become one. So it goes back again to ask the question, at what point, when the fuel gets here at $2.50, and it goes to the pump at $4.50, $4.75, $4.80, in normal times pre-COVID, at what point does off-reg believe, just as though one of your other colleagues will sit back and say to CUC, that capital expenditure is unnecessary, you shouldn't be doing that. At what point does off-reg step in and say, guys, you shouldn't be doing this, because all you're going to do, you're investing money in the retail space, but you're pumping up the cost on the wholesale space. The two of them need to be held separate. At what point then do you step in and say, guys, this can't work, this formula can't work, because the whole market is now cloudy?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I believe we need to clarify a very important point in relation to this matter before us. The wholesalers, they own properties in the retail space. The relationship, as far as we've seen it when we have their contracts, allows for the retailers to operate relatively independent. And I am aware that you will say if they own it, the ones that they own, they will have some level of influence, and that may not be the case. The wholesalers do not have. So we do have 3 or 4 forms of retail operations, and these are retail owned, retail operated. That's where the independent person owns the site, owns the property, builds the gas station, maybe with the assistance of the wholesalers for branding and other purposes. And he then enters a relatively arm's length arrangement with the wholesalers to supply him fuel on his terms and whatever other provisions are there in the contract. Then there is a company-owned retail operated site where the company may own part or all of, but mainly the land and the building, and of course the branding elements again. And they then have a franchisee or a licensee which operates that site via a similar arm's length relationship, and they're allowed to do what they're doing in that space. Thirdly, we have what is called a company-owned, company-operated, and I would like maybe to stick an asterisk in the sky next to that one, company-owned, company-operated gas station, where the company owns all of the assets, the company employs all of the personnel, the company takes on all of the expenses, including electricity and water, and the company then, as you would imagine, set the price at that site and determine how it wishes to play in that space. The asterisk is that I believe that this is where the discussion is at, in that may be the perception that might be happening in the market, but what is happening in actual fact is the company-owned retail sites where they own the land and they have an extended arrangement with those players. So the company-owned, company-operated sites, based on our record, there are none of those in the Cayman Islands. So they own these properties, and they build a site, and they're operating it as if they are the retailers. We do not have any of those. And lastly, we have the complete independent sites, which is more or less like the retail-owned, retail-operated, but under that arrangement, the retailers are free to have a bit more of a flexible arrangement. Maybe they don't carry the branding, etc. We don't have any of those in the Cayman Islands also, so that arrangement does not apply in this case. So based on that arrangement, if that may be helpful to this discussion, the company owned, retailer operated, and the retailer owned, retail operated allows the retailers some level of independence in terms of marketing their product and what they do, how they compete in the retail space, as removed as far as practicable from the wholesale operation. So with that, I don't know if that maybe brings some more context to the discussions.
Actually, no, but I'm going to bring it back in simpler terms. Let's start with one issue. Does OFREG believe that 100% markup on fuel, landed costs, including transportation and duty, that 100% markup is reasonable in this market?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, we don't believe that 100% markup is sustainable.
Then the next question is, what then do OFREG, well, first, why does OFREG allow it? And then secondly, what does OFREG believe to be a reasonable markup on fuel in Cayman?
Through you, Mr. Chair. In order to regulate the market, we have set a process in motion, and we've disclosed this a number of times. The process has been set back for various reasons, but we are in that process, coming to the conclusion on that process. And that process will inform how we are going to set the parameters for the regulation of both the wholesale and the retail prices in the market, up to and including the option that we spoke about the last time. So we are in that process. It's regrettable that the process has taken this long for reasons known to this committee. Once that process is concluded, we are then in a position to make more informed decisions. What we are doing currently is that we are monitoring to ensure one specific provision in the same FMR law that you referenced earlier is that while those markups may not be sustainable, as we believe, we are monitoring to ensure that the changes in price currently is according with the prices, with refined prices globally, not crude oil prices, with refined prices. So we're monitoring to ensure that that level of margins that you referred to earlier is maintained until we determine that these are the parameters, whether it's some sort of soft price control mechanism or the full-blown price control mechanism. That's not our decision. We make those recommendations, or as you made a reference to, whether there may be a variation of the RCAM model to intervene in the market. We must arrive at a place based on evidence. We must arrive at a place based on a very methodical approach to regulating the market. Otherwise, we're going to expose ourselves. Thank you.
Then my next question is, the last time you were here, you testified, at least I believe it was you, that just pre-COVID, you looked at the price of one of the providers that are coming in and realized that it was basically too expensive, and they were basically encouraged to lower their price. And I think that's when I think it was 30 cents. I think you said that they took off the price. Then I asked the question, based on that evidence previously, what process did you use? Because clearly you use a process to determine that that fuel was too expensive at that time. Then the question is, did you just pull it out of the air, or that was a process you used? And the question is, if you use that process then, why isn't that process used or applied generally then? Or was it just a one-time process that you guys got up one day and said, enough is enough, we're going to do this? You clearly use a process. Can you walk us through that process then, so we can understand why that process can't be applied at a not to board upon wholesale level?
Through you, Mr. Chair. To walk you through the process, what we currently do is we receive all of the information from the wholesalers, so we get their first cost, and this information is obtained under the provision of Section 10 of the Dangerous Substances Law. So we obtain their first cost, we obtain their
Sorry, before going further, the first cost comes from an invoice from their subsidiary. That's the invoice from their subsidiary, correct?
That is correct, sir.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Continue.
Then we add the duties and the various government imposts, the various government fees. The duties, port, wharfage fees, etc. And then we arrive at what a landed cost is for that batch of product, based on information we have from the importers, whether they use the inventory method they use. We then determine for whoever uses the weight average, we do the blend and determine what their aggregate costs of product or inventory costs should be or is closely within range of, based on the information we have. And we do this on a rolling basis. Then we look at their wholesale price, which they set, and that will be the price to the retailers. And then we also look at the markups, the wholesalers, to see where the pump prices currently are. So that has been done, and that started since OFREG came into being. And that was the basis on which we determined at that time that the price was, the reductions were not passed through, because what is reflecting at the pumps is higher than what we have calculated based on their inventory method to get to that end price. So that's essentially it in a nutshell.
So if you guys have, how many times since OFREG has been around have you guys went back out and said to those guys, lower the price? So that one time, was it the COVID time, or have you done that before?
We have done it on numerous occasions. Once they communicate a price change to us, we would review our numbers, and if it's give and take over 5 cents, let's say the increase should be they've gotten product and it's 10 cents, and they've increased it by 10 cents, give and take. If they've gotten product at 12 cents and they want to take it up to maybe 13 cents, maybe a difference for any reason, we would challenge that because it's not proportionate to the acquisition cost that they would have gotten. There may be other unanticipated fees, the margin, other fees that may impact that. But we would have gone to the wholesalers every time a price change is communicated to us.
Do you guys regulate the gas stations?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we monitor all prices locally, so it'll be prices at the wholesale and at the retail level.
Okay, no, what I'm trying to get at is, at the end of the day, the wholesalers, excuse me, sell to the retailers. We agree on that. So, and Johnny Brown also testified that someday you get an email that basically said, the price of fuel is now this. And he says, when someone drops off the fuel, one of them drop off the fuel, the driver leaves with a check. Some of them, I think, is a couple of days after he has to pay. Yeah. So the price that you're talking about, because there's supposed to be two prices, then you're looking at, there's a wholesale price and a retail price. If I'm an independent retailer of my own gas station, and I'm getting my price at, say, $1, and I decided because I like Cheetos and my Cheetos ain't selling enough, I'm going to put a margin of $1 on to my gas. If they want to come, they come. They don't want to come, they don't come. I have that prerogative to set what margins I want on my gas. So the price that you're talking about at the pump, if you guys are not regulating the gas stations, then the question is, how can you determine or use what's at the pump? The only persons you're regulating is really the wholesalers. And the only price that you can regulate is the wholesale price. Now, the only thing that can happen is the wholesalers would then say to the retailers, off-regulars come, lower that price by 30 cents. And if the wholesalers that you regulate is telling the retailers then to lower the price, then it means that the wholesalers is controlling the retail market. But how do you go from regulating the wholesalers and then them telling the retailers what to do? Because all of those gas stations are independently owned, operated, or are independently operated. They shouldn't be in a position to tell me as an independent retailer what to charge at the pump. If I like making $1 on Thursdays because that is what I like to do, then that is my prerogative to set it on the pump. If I want to lower my gas at nights when everyone is asleep and raise it in the morning or in the week, that is my prerogative. So how do you get the wholesaler to drop that 30 cents in the retail market, unless, of course, they're controlling the retail market? I mean, I'm trying to figure out how that happened.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I do not believe that the wholesalers actually exert that sort of influence or pressure on the retailers. When the wholesalers communicate their prices to the retailers, in recent times, and we objected to this also, we've noticed that they've been actually suggesting in their communication, because we received those emails too, they've been suggesting a retail price to all of their retailers. And this is why we've seen an element that we've addressed with them. But the point I'm going to hopefully clarify is...
Before you move off of that point, the wholesalers suggesting to the retailers what they should charge. Now, isn't that in itself uncompetitive, I mean, this is how the market is supposed to work. The market is supposed to be demand and supply. And the minute the supplier or the wholesale supplier is now suggesting to the retailer what they should charge, therein lies the problem. I will yield. I know someone else has some other questions. I'll give someone else.
Mr. Chairman, through you, Mr. Saunders has already questioned that the part. Did you say they suggested? Okay, now, let me backtrack a little bit, Mr. Chairman, through you. You said you were monitoring to reach. How long have you been monitoring for?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we've been monitoring fuel prices as part of our remit starting January 2017. We have been monitoring prior to that under the Petroleum Inspectorate.
So 2017, 2020, so it's almost 3 years to make a decision. How long do you intend to do this monitoring to come to some type of decision that when it comes here before us or goes before the country, that we will know? How long does it have gone for? Because what I'm seeing here is you said one time just before this, you told them 30 cents and they dropped it. And you said you suggested things before, but you didn't come out and state clearly whether they had dropped it or not. You said you suggested. What are all of this monitoring that you're doing? You're supposed to arrive at some place to make a decision, to do something, to say your markup of 100% is wrong. I'm only allowing you 30%, because I will ask you once again, who does off-reg? You work for off-reg. Who does off-reg work for?
Is that a,
That's a question. Who does off-reg? Who do you all answer to?
yes, as through you, Mr. Chair, as you outlined clearly in the last session, we work for the people of the Cayman
For the
Islands.
people of this country. You do not work for the fuel companies. You have to help our people who are suffering reach someplace, a relief from what's going on in this sector. Now, going back once again, through you, Mr. Chair, talking about the part where you said that they're leasing the land, leasing the station, but they're semi-independent, right? In 2002, I was offered to run something called Express Lube, which belonged to one of these companies. It had been losing money for 4 or 5 years. And when it was given to me to outline the rules, within 3 months I made money. And at the end of the first year, I paid back the previous year's bill, plus I had no bills from my first year. How? Instead of buying all of their products, because you got a certain product from them you had to buy, but there were side products for upselling. Things like air filters, things like fuel filters. When I purchased it from the company, they would cost me $11. When I purchased it from a company overseas, they would cost me $3.95. So right away, I would order 1 case, 2 cases from them each month just to keep them happy. But I was paying off the bills that they'd never seen got paid before. They were getting the money that they requested every month. They turned a blind eye. And why I'm saying that, sir, is you can be semi-independent all you want. Who owns the land? Owns everything. And you can drop the contract. We don't know if there's a unspoken handshake on certain things. Do you agree?
Through you, Mr. Chair, likely.
Okay, sir. I'm finished, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you. And certainly, again, thank you to the witness for appearing for a second time. My colleague, the member from Bordentown West, I think, asked the essential question of all of these hearings. How do you get the wholesalers to lower their prices, perhaps to a more acceptable level that the consumer feels that they're not being ripped off? Now, you've given evidence to this question, but I want to hear it again because it is the basis of my argument. Off-reg gave testimony to this committee that asserts that the off-reg policy as it relates to prices is to encourage lower prices, not through price control, but through competition. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. The only competition in the wholesale space in the last 30 years that the Cayman Islands has enjoyed has come in the form of refuel and clean gas. But arguably from the pump prices is what I'm looking at from the consumer standpoint. Refuel is the only competition to enter the market other than the 2 dominant suppliers of Rubis and Esso, Rubis and Sol, however you want to call them. How do you encourage wholesalers to lower their prices? The answer is you ensure that competition has the opportunity to operate properly.
We heard from Refuel yesterday where they shared their pricing model, which they claimed is demand-based. Demand-based says to me, what the consumer is prepared to pay for it is the price upon which they set their price at the pumps. It is a highly subjective price, if not artificial. Simply because in the gasoline and diesel world, we have discovered that the consumer will travel great distance to save 5 or 10 cents. And 5 or 10 cents in savings is a big deal to them. Point in fact, when Ofreg was required to post, or when Ofreg required the retail stations to publish, post publicly on the side of the roads or otherwise their pricing, it was quickly discovered then that the pricing at the Countryside Rubis was the cheapest on the island. And there were persons traveling from West Bay to Savannah, from East End to North Side, just to buy gas from this gentleman's gas station because it was 5 or 10 cents cheaper. It worked for a while, but it did not last. Arguably, if it had lasted, certainly the prices would have come down 5 or 10 cents to match the Countryside Rubis island-wide. Refuel came on the market, and we learned that Refuel's competitive edge is that they don't buy through Rubis and Sol like every other retailer in the Cayman Islands, including my colleague. Therefore, they are not subject to the 3 or 4 markup points that every other retailer is. So arguably, Refuel is in a position to offer its pricing structure dramatically different, reduced prices, than any of its competition. And surely, if it did so properly, it may very well be the only station getting all of the business, and certainly the wholesalers would clue in, and rather than lose their investment, they would bring their pricing to match. Thus, competition has been allowed to work properly, and therefore the consumer benefits. Now, to prove my point even further, the director of Refuel brought with him his attorney, and his attorney went on to state the generally accepted notion that retailers don't make their money on the spread or their margins on what they sell gasoline at pumps for, but instead the services that they offer in the stores, whether it be food, whether it be packaged food, cooked food, ice, you name it, alcohol now. It is on those products in which the margins are sufficient to cover their costs and provide the owners with a margin of profit. Now, that may very well be the case as it exists with every other service station who are buying their wholesale product from the 2 dominant suppliers. But interestingly enough, Rubis, to my knowledge, Refuel, to my knowledge, does not have a service station. They aren't selling packaged food. They aren't selling prepared food. So the only profit center for Refuel is on the gasoline at the pumps. And whilst it took me a little while to correct myself, my math was slightly off, but thankfully we have an accountant in our midst who all he has, a CPA in our midst, who all he has to do is look at me harshly, and I've realized I've made an error. Whilst I initially erred in my initial calculations in terms of what I determined to be Refuel's spread, or their margin, their profit margin, I was able to determine that on average, Refuel operates at about a 60% profit margin. What they pay for the fuel from the open market versus what they sell it for at their pumps. 66% margin on premium, 60% margin on E10, and 46% margin on regular gasoline. This is all at self-serve prices. It's less than 100%, as we have seen in other merchants across the islands, that of course lend itself to the argument that we should have price control. We think of Home Depots, lawn stores, other products that we in the Cayman Islands have because we like to travel. We know what these things cost. We love Miami and Florida. We go there all the time. We can see the difference between the identical item on a shelf in Walmart versus a shelf in the Cayman Islands, and we compare apples to apples, and we see just how much we're being fleeced. But again, we need the product. It's necessary, so we buy it. The problem with demand-based pricing, and my question to OFREG is, as my colleague asked, at what point does OFREG step in? If we accept demand-based pricing, then we are accepting that the prices in the Cayman Islands are not based on the value of the product, what the Auditor General's office likes to call value for money in every possible report that is written. We are no longer valuing that product on its true value to the owner, but we are valuing it on what the last person was prepared to pay for it. And clearly, in my mind, that is not allowing competition to act as it should. And if it is allowed to be the norm, then retail petroleum pricing will continue to skyrocket, similarly to real estate prices in the Cayman Islands, which operates under the same model. Real estate is no longer valued at the value of the home and the chattels and the location, but arguably, what makes the difference between properties on 7 Mile Beach versus properties in Boddentown Road different is what the last buyer was prepared to pay for it. And that is highly subjective, if not artificial, and in my mind is not the way competition is intended to work. I wonder if the witness, Mr. Monroe, through you, Mr. Chairman, would care to respond to that. And again, the question, at what point does OFREG as regulator step in?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We are mandated to step in from the point OFREG was formed. What we are doing, as I indicated previously, is going through that process to arrive there based on a methodical and evidence-based approach. From the first day OFREG started operation, we outlined a number of options we can consider, and in order to arrive there, we set out on what regulated markets do, which is market assessment, defining markets, fully assessing competition to then say, this is the level of intervention into this market that we will pursue. On the surface of it, it's very easy to determine that, yes, the wholesalers, we need to intervene. But when you look at the economic and the regulatory context of what we're doing, it may mean only wholesale gasoline that is what really needs to be regulated or price controlled, because diesel fuel is so heavily influenced by CUC, which is the largest off-taker, the largest consumer of diesel, that there is no point in regulating road diesel fuel because it's wasted resource, wasted energy. So this exercise is really the exercise we're currently undertaking is to determine precisely where our energies should be targeted so that we can set those regulatory parameters in place. Worst case, the price control.
Respectfully, thank you for that response. Again, using the refuel as an example. You know, as regulator, they're not purchasing their fuel from the existing dominant wholesalers. So you know, as a matter of record, what their fuel at their wholesale level, once they bring it out of Port Everglades or wherever, the minute their fuel arrives in the Cayman Islands, I'm assuming Ofreg has some indication through invoices received from the gas station or otherwise what they paid for their imported product. Rubis also has a number of vehicles. I see them on the road all of the time with a lovely little Ofreg magnet attached to it, all ranges of vehicles, from the small to the super large, from the common to the super luxurious. All Ofreg needs to do is drive by the refuel gas station, look up, as the lawyer pointed out, at either of the four corners of the building, and you will see what they are charging in retail. Knowing from the invoices what they paid for it, and seeing for your own two eyes as regulator what they're charging for it, what more evidence does Ofreg need in order to intervene? How many more reports do we need to write? How many more research studies do we need to engage in before we ask ourselves, is the price being charged to the consumer marked up at a reasonable rate of return? Maybe I should ask the question the other way. With an average markup between three petroleum lines of 60%, does Ofreg believe that a markup of 60%, the value of a product, in this case petroleum products, gasoline and diesel, 60% markup, a reasonable margin upon which for a retail provider to charge? And is that, in your mind, the adequate competition that is going to lead to lower prices across that product chain and other service providers in fulfilling your mandate, which very clearly states that Ofreg opts to encourage competition versus the nuclear option of moving towards price control as it relates to reducing prices to the consumer?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Refuels is actually presenting a formidable level of competition in the retail space. To the question of the 60%, you said, or 60 cents markup on the retail level as to whether it is adequate or it's reasonable. You would have heard, the House would have heard the testimonies of the retailers. We have not drilled down into their operations to see how that cost is covering expense. There is going to be regulatory accounts that are going to be set up at the retail and the wholesale level to understand how that revenue, that gross margin is actually defraying their expense. It could be that because the entity is a gas station, that the revenues from fuel is being used to cover all the costs when it really should be focused on what we would call the forecourt. Only those expenses needs to be segregated to ensure that the revenues from that aspect of the business is covering expenses on that aspect. Maybe that is something that we will need to look at in some detail. So whether that number is adequate, it's too early for me to actually make a determination that percentage markup is reasonable or unreasonable at this point in time. But as I said earlier, there are always opportunities for improvements, retail, wholesale levels, and I believe that there are opportunities to optimize those numbers.
How long has refuel been a service provider in this jurisdiction? When did they enter the market?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Refuels entered the market. They got an operating permit from us around August of 2017.
So 3.5 years, the only real competition to the existing two dominant players entered the market 3.5 years ago. 2017, when we look at our term in office, which is about to expire 9 months away, 3.5 years is a reasonable number. We're almost at the end of it, Mr. Saunders. So 3.5 years, we have a new entrant to the market in an environment where OFREG encourages competition to reduce pricing. And we still have not determined whether or not Refuel is providing competitive pricing as per the OFREG regulatory approach. Is that what you're telling this committee? That it's going to take God knows how much longer, another 3.5 years before OFREG can be in a position to determine and satisfy itself as regulator whether or not this new competitor has improved the situation or simply added to the problem? When can we expect OFREG to act, Mr. Monroe?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. In 2 months' time, we should have recommendations to Cabinet, and once the exercise we're undertaking is concluded. Thank you.
I need to jump in one minute, Mr. Chairman. No, I'm done. Okay. I want to drill down in this OFREG versus the wholesalers owning gas stations. In the case of Refuel, they only have a frontline operation. They don't have any store on site. The 60% markup for them is gross, that the member for Prospect laid, right? The evidence that they gave to this assembly is that the reason they can't lower their prices anymore is because they are at maximum capacity at the present site. They can't possibly sell any more gasoline than they are selling or diesel at that site than they are currently selling, right? They are covering their capital costs, and the only means that they have to cover their capital costs is the sale of fuel. Earlier on, the member for George Bordentown West asked you, if you are allowing the wholesalers to invest in front houses, you call them, tanks and pumps, and recover that expenditure through the wholesale price. And you say you didn't know whether they were doing it or not. Am I correct? Huh?
Mr. Chair, you're clarifying whether the wholesalers are allowed to recover their investment on forecourts? Yes, they are going to recover.
All right. And the only how they can recover that is by increasing the price of fuel. That's all they sell. That's all they're supposed to be selling. Through the frontline investment, because the gas don't pump biscuits. The tank don't pump biscuits.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chair. But have we discounted the fact that when they invest, there will be an increase in sales, so the increased volumes are going to increase?
No, that's irrelevant here now, sir, right? So we only have so many cars on the island. And if you look around at similar countries to us, we have less cars per gas station than anybody in the region. So there's only so many opportunities to sell fuel, right? have you been given evidence by the wholesalers that when they invest $1 million to make a station look pretty, better tanks, better pumps, etc., right? They can recover, they have been recovering that capital expense by increased volume sales to that gas station?
Mr. Chair, no, they have not. We don't have information to say once they invest that
Okay,
volume
so,
sales.
okay. And you have no concern about that as a regulator?
Yes, we certainly do, Mr. Chair.
Well, why haven't you asked for the information from the wholesaler who's supplying the gas station and making the investment?
Mr. Chair, it would be a piecemeal approach, and as I said, we're taking a wholesale approach to the market.
Right.
So,
but this holistic approach belongs in church. It don't belong in commerce, right? What we need here is specific approach to specific causes to the increase in fuel in this country. If we are going to continue we are not doing nothing unless we can paint the whole fuel industry by the same brush, we'll never get anything done. Let me finish up before I want to go. Okay. So you're not interested in specific occurrences. What you're interested in is global, holistic rationale.
Mr. Chair, as I outlined earlier, what we are seeking to do is we have just entered the regulatory space for retail fuels. So
Sorry,
it's
no,
not a,
you've been there
it's not
3
a-
years. That's not recent. I'm not accepting an argument that you're just entering this thing. You've been in it 3+ years. And you were in it before, although you were only checking. Okay. All right. Sorry to interrupt you, but I really not interested in this business about you need longer to do things. 3 years is a long time. Okay. You want to jump in on this, Chris? Go ahead, because I want to come back to where I think these wholesalers are forcing government to break their own laws.
Well, using the same vein of the wholesale, let's look at the market wholesale. How many gallons of fuel is being used in the retail market each year?
Let me tell you something.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're having an estimate of about 17 million gallons pumps through the retail network.
Okay, 17 million. And sorry, do you have the breakdown between whether it's Sol, Rubis, or refuel? Do you have that breakdown at that level?
We do, Mr. Chair. I can provide that to you.
Yeah,
off
you can
record.
provide it. Yeah, I don't need it. Yeah. No, well, yeah, I'll take it offline. That's fine. I'm fine with it being off thing there. The next question then, of that 17 million that is being, do you also have the breakdown of the margins that the retailers charge on fuel? Or generally, like what margin markup between wholesale and retail?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we do have that information.
Okay, and when you multiply out that 17 million on that margin, and then you look at all the gas stations that we have and the capital costs, is that a is that a reasonable amount of sales times that margin to get a reasonable return on that capital cost?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would hazard a guess that it's a reasonable return based on those earnings.
Okay, here's where I get a little bit lost. And again, I'm going to ask the Auditor General to basically step in and help us out with regards to these numbers. For 2011, the total amount of gas imported into the country was 10.5 million. 2012, 9.7 million. 2013, 11 million. 2014, 10.5 million. 2015, 10.9 million. 2016, 11.4 million. The next year after that, 11.3, 13.1, 14.7, for an average of 10.7 million, and this is coming from the Port Authority's website of what is imported into the country. At no point between 2011 and 2019 have we imported 17 million gallons of gas. Actually, it's about maybe around 60% of that, it looks like. So the question then I have to ask is, what level of inventory is sitting? Because if they're running 17 million, and on the gas side, they're basically bringing in, on average, 10.7 million, the only way we can get up to your other 7 million thing there is unless there's a lot of diesel vehicles on island to even get into that number. So I'm going to ask the Auditor General and our team to take a look at that again, because if there's revenue leakage here where people are bringing in gas and it's not going through the port, then we have a problem in terms of custom revenue. So that's one analysis that we need to get done. The next thing I want to ask is this. This is the Cayman Islands Compendium of Statistics 2018. I walk with this stays in my vehicle, it doesn't leave, I travel with it. It's 194 pages in total of what government puts out on every government department. What information does your office on fuels provide in this almost 200-page document?
Through you, Mr. Chair, you mean in terms of direct information we feed to the
Yeah,
ESO
like the
office?
fuel information and all of these statistics.
They've never, through you, Mr. Chair, they have not requested information from us in terms of compiling that compendium.
Where is the Financial Secretary who's responsible for Economics and Statistics Office? Okay, we'll deal with them separately. The reason why I'm asking these questions, Mr. Monroe, is that there needs to be a cultural shift with regards to fuel and everything else. My next question then is, prior to the creation of OFREG, what was your job?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Chief Petroleum Inspector, and that was responsible
And
for
that primarily dealt with what?
safety and compliance in the sectors, ensuring that all the participants in the sector that operates, handles fuel above a certain amount, complies with the relevant codes and legal requirements.
Okay. And you see, the reason why I'm getting here, and since the creation of OFREG, just out of curiosity now, what training have you been on? Because the chairman started out in his opening testimony listing all the qualifications and who've been on what training for regulatory and everything else, and how many other people have X. What training did you go on since the creation of OFREG to move you from basically the fuel side of safety, the quality of fuel and everything else, to basically regulating the entire industry?
Through you, Mr. Chair, so I've been on auxiliary training in terms of regulating industries, and I also did ICP, International Center for Parliamentary Studies on Regulatory Affairs. So I would have done those two trainings as well as other bespoke online trainings we would have undertaken.
Okay, and in your opinion, do you believe that that training has sufficiently prepared you to deal with the multi-billion-dollar organizations that pay people serious money to return their best that they can do for their shareholders, do you think that your team, yourself and your team, is equipped to go up against the Sols, the Rubis, and basically, and I mean, over this display, we even saw even the firepower that Flo walked in here with yesterday. I mean, everybody was there, Zoom and everybody else. Is your team, do you believe, fully equipped to basically get into this market and manage it at a regulatory level? We're going now from the quality of fuel to the prices of fuel, the futures of the fuel market, storage, refinery, bulk, and all that kind of stuff within basically a 3.5-year period with companies that have basically been around from the beginning of time and to some extent.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair. I believe it's a reasonable question. It's pointing to competence, but I think the best way to
I'm not commenting. What I'm sorry, and if it came across that way, I want to beg.
No, I'm just saying that
Yeah.
in terms of it's a competence question, and I think a good way to answer it is that we have very similar experience and competence as the other sectors in terms of regulating the area that we are called to regulate. What we certainly don't have is the size of the manpower to actually do it, and that is known. So it's more.
The reason I'm asking it, just to put it in context, I look at the ERA, which I think one of your colleagues was at before the ERA in doing CUC. I look at the ICTA, which was around, that was doing telecoms. And this is still a fairly new entity in terms of regulation. And what I'm trying to get at, and this is not pointing at you, is while the government have had years of experience in ERA that dealt with CUC, years of experience in ICTA that dealt with telecoms, what I'm trying to get at now is the investment being made for this important industry that is now regulating fuel, because I feel as if though almost that they have given you a basket to carry water in. And like I said, and this is where I'm getting at, I'm trying to argue, because right now as it stands, and the reason why I'm raising it, in the ICT sector, they already have royalty fees being charged based on their costs. So they have, royalties different from their, I think it's a regulatory fee, where they take all of their costs and they divide it up between all the different sectors. So there's a mechanism in place to pay government royalties, but also to recoup the cost of the ICT sector. Then there's also, in the ERA side, money designed, or a formula designed to get money to CUC to have cover those costs. So you had a situation where both the ICT and ERA had mechanism in place to cover their costs and water, to cover their costs of their regulation. The last time we came here, I think when the government was asking for $1 million or something, sorry, forgive the number, to cover on the fuel side, it means then that there's not a mechanism in place in which to cover this cost. Now, at the ICT sector in past, gone out and do the training and all of the development, those costs would have been recouped from the very people in which that they were regulating. Equally so on the ERA side, because those costs are basically divided up and charged back out to the different licensees that they take there. That does not exist in your sector. And what I'm trying to get at is, have we made the necessary investment in your team? Because at the end of the day, and in your sector, because it's still fairly new, it requires a lot of work. And what I was trying to get out of these hearings was, where was that investment made from that transition between more of an inspectorate from a safety and handling side to now a full-blown regulator? Now, I've always believed that everybody needs attitude and aptitude, and anything can be taught. So I'm not going to sit back and say, I don't think that you're capable of doing the job. And if I ever come across that way, please forgive me. Because I've moved from telecoms to banking with zero experience, but a CFO in one is a CFO in another. It's a complete different transition. But to go now into a full regulator where you get into the whole economics of stuff, driven by economics primarily now in terms of regulation and prices and all that kind of stuff, that's what I'm more getting at. And in terms of your team now, how many members do you have on your team? and in particular, how many of them are basically economists to be looking at fuel and, more importantly, like the futures markets and those kind of stuff? Because we have already heard from the ICT section that the very legal issue of having a proper regulatory lawyer to focus on ICT issues, because these are separate issues. The ICT issue is different from a fuel issue. There are different lawyers, different regulators, and that kind of stuff. We're already seeing that there is already a mismatch, or rather, the necessary skills in there to help on the ICT side with regards to the legal framework. And I'm trying to understand now on your side, because the purpose of this exercise is to make offering more effective and efficient. No one here has ever said that anyone should be fired, removed, or anything. We want offering to be better. And what I'm trying to get from here, especially the finance committee coming up next week, and to start pushing, is what resources or what is it that is needed to make your sector to be more, I guess, effective and more efficient. And that's really what I'm trying to get at.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I sincerely appreciate the clarification on the point of ensuring that we are adequately resourced. It has been somewhat a bone of a contention for us. But the current team structure is myself as director, one fields analyst who mainly leads the charge in terms of the economic side of the business, and the establishment calls for 2 fields inspector. We currently have 1. Currently, we are down to just 1 staff because of a medical issue with one of our teams. So it's 1 staff, along with myself, carrying our current workload, and that is being looked at, that is being addressed.
Before going further, so your department is an head count of 3, but only 2 people are working?
Mr. Chair, head count of 4, but only 2.
So head count of 4, with only 3 working?
With only 2 working.
So head count of 4, but only 2 working. So you have 1 vacancy and 1 sick.
Yes, sir.
And does your board, I mean, because I'm going to tell you right now, there is no way, zero, zilch, nada, even if you could be killed with kryptonite, there's no way that even a head count of 4 can sit down and manage an industry of this size. It is impossible. And you're talking about going up now, because, like I said, one witness basically came and like, the high cost, this is what we're going to charge you, and what you can do about it. That's pretty much the message that came out. The high cost jurisdiction, so we charge it. You know what I mean? This is a culture that needs to change. And what I need from you before you go here today, because like I said, what has happened in the past has happened. There's nothing that we can do to change it. What I need from you, and if you don't have the answer today, it's fine, because you can email it to us separately, is to go off and tell us honestly, what is it you think your team needs for us to get this done? Because I'm telling you, now I understand why so many things have been started and can't, if you only got 2 people working or 3 people working, it can't be done. You know what I mean? And I really feel bad that you're in the hot seat that you're in, and you have not been given the tools, and you're not going to say it because it means there's going to be a criticism on either your board or on your CEO, and you need to go work with them. I don't. You need to have that working relationship with them. I don't. But at the end of the day, to put things in context, you have been given a basket to carry water in, and you are completely outgunned by these big boys in these industries that are hell-bent on taking as much money out of our people as possible. Now, that is something we need to fix. That is not something you can fix. That's something for us inside this chamber to go deal with the government at a bigger level. The last time, as it stands, I think when the Premier came, he asked for the money. So your department is actually being funded by the public purse. And the truth of the fact is, we need to be putting more money inside it if that is the case. But we can't have a situation where you are basically being paid directly from the public purse, not from the other licensees, and then we're also not getting the value for money that we should basically be getting. And that is something for us to go deal with. Because the other questions at this point now becomes almost moot in terms of what needs to be done. You know, it's a lot of work. You know what I mean? And I genuinely wish you all the best. I think you're a decent person. You have been professional through this entire thing, and dealing with politicians that are like us isn't easy. You know what I mean? And I never ever want anyone to feel as if though, but you know, that anyone is looking to ambush them or anything, but it is part of the process. And like I said, the report starts out looking at efficiency and effectiveness. And one thing is clear from this on the fuel side is that we have a lot more work to do, and it is on the resource badly. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, just before you go. And the reason being, and what I would suggest, and I will say this, and I know they are listening, is to look at the capital on that return on capital, return on investment. Because I really feel bad also for refuel, where one regulatory change basically cost them $1.5 million between loading a truck at the top versus loading a truck at the bottom just to make that change. You know what I mean? Or whatever it is. When you have those small operations and you have to make changes within the millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you're making 50, 60 cents on a gallon of fuel, that is a lot of fuel to sell to make that cost back up. And those are the kind of things that will impact the market. Because I'm almost certain if he didn't have to do that, the prices would have been different. And again, this is why we need to also look at legislative impact and regulatory impact on the areas that we basically regulate. So there's a lot of different stuff, but I want to bring it back to one question, moving away then from the whole pricing issue.
If I may, through you, Mr. Chair, just to also bring some further context to the discussion, and I certainly appreciate the points that you raised in relation to our capacity. But one of the things I really want to underscore is that Off-Right coming together was to leverage those the experiences and those systems that ICT and ERA would have had in place, so that we did not see ourselves as having a fresh start, so we can take on board. So we were going to leverage, and we have been leveraging experiences here and there, but you're correct in that it was not easy mapping of what they were doing as compared to what we are seeking to accomplish. So it wasn't an easy transition of those resources, but I certainly want to give credit to the process and where we've come this far, in that we have been leaning on the other sectors to bring us to this point, but we are going to certainly need to streamline that going forward. Thank you.
I can tell you right now, the only thing that you could have gotten in synergies is on the administrative side, because debit is still credit, cost is still cost. I can tell you, a regulatory lawyer that deals with telecoms is a complete different animal from a regulatory lawyer that deals with fuels. I can tell you it's a completely different thing. The contracts are different, everything else is different. So barring that, unless you have a lawyer for each section, focus on each section, it ain't gonna work. And let's like I said, these are not small industries. These are multi-billion-dollar industries. This is not a patty shop. And the effect that it has on the local economy is absolute. I mean, it drives up every single thing. As I said, coming from banking, 10 million in loans just to pay the light bill. I mean, just to break it down, you know. But the one question I want to ask, then moving away from pricing, because clearly, like I said, that's a resource we need to deal with. I understand from Sol that they have another tank being built. I think they're given is it Sol that's building one more tank?
Mr. Chair, they're refurbishing a tank, and they do have an additional tank in the pipeline to erect.
Okay, so they're refurbishing one tank, and that additional tank, is it going to be for diesel, is it going to be for gas, or is it going to be for jet?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe it's for diesel. Okay, so they're getting more into the diesel mark. And the reason why I ask that is that, one, in speaking to CUC, and the whole issue came up in terms of diesel, because one of the reasons why I've asked for the capacity of each tank and also the fuel usage is that in yesteryears gone by, when you're at the deep pockets of Chevron, Texaco, and Esso or Exxon or whatever, their fuel supply on island would have been around anywhere from 4 to 6 months on island. From what I understand now, and just my rough calculation, and you'll be in a better position to know, is that
based on the time in which the ship is coming and what it is that they're using, it appears as if though, between the wholesalers and the retailers, excluding CUC, I'm just talking in gas, we're talking about maybe 1 month worth of supply on island. So it means then that the fuel is more susceptible, more exposed to market forces when you have in a 1 month window in terms of buying or selling versus a 6 month window. And the reason why I ask that question is this. We have been told that we lost the window on cheap fuel. And the reason why I asked for the information that I did, that you provided, and thank you for it, is that I wanted to calculate for myself how many fuel was on island, how much capacity did we have, and if it was a situation, or matter of fact, you know what? You can actually do the analysis and send it to us. I don't need to do it. I forget you guys have it. And the AG, the Auditor General team has the capacity also. Is how many fuel was on island at the start of the year? Okay? How much we have basically, what capacity we had? Because I need to understand if we had cheap fuel out there at the COVID price when, according to the testimony from Mr. Nicholas from Rubis, $1.50 US a gallon was pre-COVID, and it went down to as low as 50 cents. And I need to know when that cheap fuel was there, that we know it was going to go back up, because it wasn't going to get, because refined market is different from the fuel market when everything was going crazy. Did we go out and take advantage of buying as much as that cheap fuel? Did we have the capacity to hold more? And didn't we do it, or why we didn't do it if we had that capacity? Or is it simply that these guys just did not have the cash flow to basically go and fill their tanks up? You know, because those are missed opportunities. And when you have a situation where you're just making your money regardless of the price, this was the one time that the consumer could have actually gotten something in all of this crisis, and nobody, and I do mean nobody, went out and said, you know what, let us go buy 2 months or 3 months worth of this fuel, and we had the capacity for it. And say, you know what, at least we know to some extent we'd have gotten that, because we know storage was a big thing that led to this entire thing. Yeah, so this is what we need to understand, you know, because if we lost that, and we've basically been told we lost that window. So it means to tell me only one tank arrived of cheap fuel, and then we have to go back now to just basically paying what we're paying, completely unacceptable. And if that is the mindset of those two major corporations in this country, then I'm going to tell you one thing. The government needs to start going out, and members of the opposition too, to start encouraging other people to come here and do business. Because clearly they don't care about the consumers, and all they care about is the shareholder. And that's fine, if that's your mindset. But we are the ones who are answerable to the consumers.
There's, and read into the record what the LCCL, the Trade and Business License, is that you supplied us with this morning. And I'm going to start with Rubis. And it says Trade and Business License, Local Companies Control Law, Local Companies Control License Grant, reference number TB11OF, license number 138. And I quote, it is hereby certified that Rubis Cayman Islands Limited of Block 6D, Parcel 10 and 12, Chevron Terminal 430 South Church Street, Georgetown, Grand Cayman, Cayman Islands, is licensed for the purpose of paragraph B of section 1 of section 4 of the above law to carry out the business of bulk fuel installation and petroleum marketing in the islands with effect from the 3rd of October 2017 until the 3rd of October 2029. This license is subject to the following conditions: that the company shall restrict its business under the license to that specified. 2, that the company shall restrict its business to the location as specified on the application, which is Block 6D, Parcel 10 and 11. There shall be no transfer of shares, change of beneficial ownership, change of officers and directors without prior written approval of the Trade and Business Licensing Board. The granting of this local company's control license in this matter does not in any way imply or infer that the board will be bound to grant any further local companies control license. Each application is considered on its own merit. That the company shall pay an annual fee of CI $2,500 for the duration of the local control license, and you will note October 2017 to 3rd of October 2029 is 12 years. Signed by, I don't know who that is, Business License Officer, Trade and Business License Board. In addition, they have a trade and business license, which is a renewal, reference number TB 1005, license number 47665. It is hereby certified that Rubis Cayman Islands Limited of Block 6D, Parcel 10 and 12, Rubis Terminal, 430 South Church Street. Notice there's a difference in the terminal name. Georgetown, Grand Cayman, Cayman Islands is licensed under the above law to carry on the trade or business of bulk fuel installation and marketing of petroleum products in the islands with effect from the 3rd of October 29 to the 3rd of October 2020. The license is subject to the following conditions. Subject to the conditions imposed on the local company's control law license. There shall be no second condition, there shall be no advertising signs on the premises without Central Planning Authority approval. So the trade and business license on an annual basis is subject to the LCCL. That's for Rubis. For Saul, the Trade and Business Licensing Board, license to a company to carry out business in the islands. This is to certify that ESSO Cayman Limited is licensed for the purposes of paragraph B, subsection 1 of section 4 of the above law to carry on the business of bulk fuel storage. Full stop. In the islands, under the provisions of the above law, until the 19th of July 2023. The license is subject to the following conditions: that the company shall restrict its business under this license to that specified. 2, that there shall be no transfer of shares, change of beneficial ownership, change of officers and directors without prior written approval of the Trade and Business Licensing Board. 3, the granting of this local company's control license in this matter does not in any way imply or refer that the board will be bound to grant any further local company's control license. Each application is considered on its own merit. Dated 19th of July 2011. The annual trade and business license, reference number TB 109F, license number 44873. It is hereby certified that Saul Petroleum Cayman Limited of Block 6D, Parcel 6-3, 512 South Church Street, Georgetown, Grand Cayman, Cayman Islands, is licensed under the above law to carry on the trade of business of bulk fuel installation in the islands with effect from the 19th of July 2019 until the 19th of July 2020. This license is subject to the following conditions. There shall be no advertising signs at the premises without Central Planning Authority approval, subject to the conditions imposed on the local company's control law license. There is no way, in my opinion, that this license allows either of these two companies to own, to lease back retail outlets. And I'm certainly disappointed that OFREG, in its regulatory gambit, does not see that it has any responsibility to report that these people are operating, in my opinion, outside of the gambit of these two licenses. Just want to put that in the record, sir.
Mr. Chair, to place on record that OFREG will forthwith look into this matter in the coming days to begin to address or remedy any issue or potential legal issues or implication that may be arising from the current situation. OFREG will undertake to look into the matter immediately.
I will also draw your attention that in the case of Esso and Sol, the LCCL is to a company called Esso Cayman Limited. The trade and business license is to a company called Sol Petroleum Cayman Limited. And I don't see how a completely different company can have a trade and business license complying with a LCCL that names a separate company. Okay, I want a couple of questions now about this business, about them and what advantage they have in owning stations. You are aware that the government owns a fuel facility at DVs. You are aware that the procurement law requires government to competitively bid on a regular basis for the purchase of any goods. It is my understanding that the tanks and the pumps at the government fuel facility at Davis is owned by one of the wholesalers and installed by one of the wholesalers. Do you see any conflict in that situation, in that the government would be prohibited from bidding it because that company now has control of the storage and dispensation of that fuel, and only how government can change provider, even if they're getting a new product at 10% of what they pay now, is to remove those tanks and those pumps and install, and that exercise would take months.
Mr. Chair, yes, I'm aware, excuse me, I'm aware of government's ownership of the facility. However, within the last 2 years, to give myself a safe net, just as you outlined, would have taken place. The company that had owned those assets, the marketing equipment, as you referred to earlier, were removed. The site was cleaned and cleared of any environmental issues, and government went through a full procurement process to purchase its own equipment and have them installed at that site. So as it currently stands, the scenario that you outlined is what obtains today. And so that allows them, as you further say, to openly bid on the supply of fuel to that facility.
But it is my understanding that government does not own the tanks and the pumps. They are owned by the current supplier.
Mr. Chair, so that has actually changed. When the upgrade was done, my memory's missing me on the dates, but when the upgrade was done, government now owns the tanks and the pumps at TBS.
Okay. The member for Bordentown West raised the evidence that was presented by OFREG that one of their recent requirements, by Refuel, sorry, one of their recent requirements was that they had to convert from top-end loading to bottom-end loading of fuel trucks. And it is my understanding that the current two wholesalers who compete against them were doing bottom loading and not top loading. Can you explain to us the reason, what was the rationale that OFREG used to force Refuel to spend substantial amount of monies to convert from top loading to bottom loading.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that change in requirement is actually in legislation that was amended during the 2016 update to the Dangerous Substances Law and its regulations. So it's now an industry-wide requirement. Those discussions were fully consulted on with the wider industry from the standpoint of safety and to achieve also the requirement of what we call a closed system of loading, so we can limit greenhouse gas emissions. The other methods of filling these trucks are pretty much open, or it's called splash loading, where the dome is open and the hose or the arm is placed into it, and there is a lot of emissions. Now, we are very conscious and aware that we are also driving for improvements in our greenhouse gas emissions. So it was purely from the safety standpoint and also to achieve our greenhouse gas NEP goals that change was made. And as I said, it was fully consulted on. So the requirement for refuel was not a targeted requirement to them only.
Did the two competitive wholesalers, did they already have bottoming loading in place prior to the law being changed?
Mr. Chair, yes, that's the case.
So it's quite possible that it was their lobby that asked it to be put in law so that anybody else coming in would have to meet that requirement.
Mr. Chair, to place on record, it's not a case that they would have lobbied. Otherwise, it just couldn't pass muster. As I said, it was purely a requirement for safety and other reasons, and the costs are not prohibitive. I do understand that the number was given, but maybe it just needed to be explained further. But to comply with that requirement, it's not cost prohibitive.
Sorry, just so I'm clear, you said that was in 2016, correct? That law was passed in 2016?
There was a 2015 amendment and then a
Okay.
2016 amendment also.
And refuel started when?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in August of 2017.
So you mean to tell me then that the rule was already there and refuel basically got permission to start their business and operate basically in contravention of the rule? Is that what we're basically being told?
To clarify, through you, Mr. Chair, when they started operation, they did not have that sort of arrangement. When they started importing and wanted to transfer fuels onto trucks, let me just step back a bit. When refuels first started, they were importing fuels and delivering that fuel from the ISO directly into their tanks. They've then entered the mobile fuel business, which required the fuel from the ISOs to be loaded onto a truck to be distributed further. I wish I brought some photographs to show you of actual situations of trucks being loaded, which is wholly unsafe. And it's not because it's not my family, it's a responsibility I have to ensure that any of these activities that are done, it must be done safely because every life matters.
Man, you just open the door, no? Every life matter. You just open the door. Listen, one of the things, just shifting gears, specifically, has there been any fines or penalties from a safety standpoint that have been issued to Sol, Rubis, or any of the refuelers, or any other companies?
True, Mr. Chair. The only fine we've issued was the fine you're aware of for the Sol incident. Apart from that, no other major fine comes to mind. There are maybe smaller price reporting fines or such like, but no other fines come to mind for the majors.
Okay, I'd ask Rubis that question, and I just want to go back to an article here from early March, 11th of March, 2020, this year, where it says the utilities regulator issued a press release Tuesday in which it revealed for the first time that a fuel spill had occurred in November last year at one of the tanks at the Jackson Point terminal, which holds fuel for the retailer Rubis. Orfreg said that it was investigating this leak at the South Sound Depot, but gave no details about the incident, which has been kept from the public for more than 3 months. Now, March, April, May, June, July, 4 months, that's 7 months. What is the update on that environmental spill of that issue? Where are we at that now, based on your press release that you would have issued?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the investigation is we have a preliminary report that we're reviewing to finalize, and then we move to the enforcement stage on that.
So, quick question then. When did we have the Jackson Point fire with Saul? When they scared all of those people in that area, that Barbara and David couldn't sleep?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it was in 2017. It would have been July 2017.
And when did you fine them $200,000 for that, correct? I think that's what the media report said.
That would be correct, sir.
And when were they fined for that? What month, what period?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it was approximately a year after.
So it took you 1 year from all of those people in that area who was basically thought the worst was going to happen. It took us 1 year to basically fine them for something that was so blatantly obvious.
Through you, Mr. Chair, what happened is we needed some additional bit of evidence, which was obtained when the tank was demolished. So the first phase of the investigation, gathering the evidence and coming up with our analysis. Then after we concluded that, they had to do an independent API assessment on the tank for us to review that report. Then we released the tank back to Saul for them to begin the demolition, and it's in the demolition that we needed information. We needed a part of the tank to do some forensics on it that we could not access while the tank was in its current form. So when it was demolished, we removed sections of it that were further analyzed. Then we put together the report. All of this done internally by the team. Quite an elaborate and intense investigation. Investigations of those natures, actually, it's done by federal boards, etc., in other jurisdictions. Our team pulled that off.
Team of 2 or 3?
The team of 3, and concluded that
You know,
investigation.
Mr. Monroe, I used to read cases in the States where when they used to electrocute prisoners, they used to do post-mortem on them. And somebody used to wonder, the man was sitting in the chair, he was alive. 2,000 votes later, he's dead. What do you think could have killed him? I say no more.
Question? If not, thank you very much, Mr. Monroe. We can move on to the next witness. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the committee, and I wish you all a safe and blessed weekend.
You can.
Yeah, you can take the mask off, though, keep it off, because that's what we have to social distance.
You don't use the Bible with the affirmation, or you use the Bible for the affirmation? No. I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give to this honorable legislative assembly shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Colford Scott, for agreeing on such short notice to come here. We're dealing with the efficiency and effectiveness of the Utility Regulation and Competitive Office, which was a report done by the Office of the Auditor General in June 2020. And some of the evidence given by the companies that are being regulated suggested that part of the reason we have such high prices is because we have to buy 91 and 89, 93 and 87 or 89 octane in order for the cars here to function properly. And I know from your experience with Davis for many years and your knowledge of the, we would like to hear from you if there's any factual truth to that the cars here cannot operate on a lower grade or cheaper gas. And I've asked Mr. Chris to start off with a question.
Yeah, no, sorry. Just to expand on what the chairman was saying is that the issue came up during one of the witness testimonies that when we were looking at prices in Cayman compared to other parts of the region, they were saying that in those parts they were using 87 octane, or they were using a different octane versus what we're using in Cayman. And if they were basically using 87 octane, the price would have been much cheaper. So the committee was curious in terms of just to kind of get a better understanding of like a 87, 89, 93 in terms of octane and the effect it would have on vehicles or whatever, just to get an understanding in terms of completeness. And it was agreed that you were the best person, independent, qualified to kind of offer this committee and the wider public just an explanation on the, yeah, and on the, just kind of give us a better explanation between the different octane levels and how they work in vehicles. And just as a matter of house cleaning, whenever you answer the first question and response, just mention your name just for the record, and for the answer it should be easier just to set the record. Thank you very much, and also thank you for coming on such short notice. It was really, really appreciated.
My name is Colford Scott, and Mr. Chairman, the matter of octane ratings is an interesting one in Cayman because most of the world uses what we refer to as the research octane number. There's also a motor octane number, but Canada and United States, and I think by extension the Cayman Islands uses what is referred to as the anti-NOx index. The anti-NOx index is the average of the motor octane number and the research octane number, the RON and the MON, divided by 2. And so it is the ability of an engine to burn gasoline without knocking. Knocking is detrimental and destructive to the petrol engine, the gasoline engine. Most of the newer cars, in fact, just about all new cars now, have electronic fuel injection. And for that to work effectively, there's a knock sensor, at least one knock sensor in each engine. Some engines have more than one. What the knock sensor does is it understands when the combustion in the cylinder is happening explosively as opposed to at a controlled rate and could damage the engine. And it reduces, I think it retards the timing on the engine so that the combustion doesn't happen so explosively. So it effectively reduces the power of the engine. If you're running very low octane, you can't develop the maximum potential of the engine. The typical fuel that we sell here, I know it as, if I can use the Rubis one, the Rubis 89 and Rubis 93. And the 89 and the 93, I believe, refer to the anti-knock index. The UK uses the RON system, but I think Cayman uses the AKI, the anti-NOx index, which is 4 to 6 points lower than the number for the same gasoline that you would have in the UK. So the numbers are different, but the gasoline may be the same. So we have regular unleaded fuel here, and the better quality at 93. Now there is a higher one at about 97, I think, that is sold in the UK. But Sol and Rubis have two qualities of fuel. So one would be regular, and the other one would be a better quality, but it is not a premium, or some people refer to it as a super premium. And I understand that Refuel has an E10 premium fuel that is the guys that still race. I'm too old for that now. And the speeding tickets are too expensive. But some of my associates tell me that the Refuel premium fuel is a bit better. So the fuel that we're getting here is effectively 89 AKI and 93 AKI.
The only effect if we went to 87 AKI would be the amount of power that you could get from the engine.
Well, you would be underutilizing the engine, and gasoline or the internal combustion engine is not the most efficient to begin with. The hybrids and the electrics are much more efficient in converting energy to movement than the gasoline engine is. So if you're taking a car that is relatively low on power, already hampered by emission controls, and then put in a very cheap fuel in it, it's a very inefficient process.
So your recommendation would be that we try to maintain the standards that we have instead of lowering the octane value to get a cheaper price?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. I wouldn't recommend that we go with a lower quality fuel than we already get here.
Matthew, welcome back. I didn't realize you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you caught my attention. I apologize. There was someone else that was acting in that seat before him, and I looked up and I just saw him. So welcome back, and understanding the reasons why you left. I am very happy that you're here. And just in time to hear the discussion about the fuel that you can use for your car. No, thank you very much for that,
I think Mr. Chris Matthew heard the word race from the witness.
Yeah.
And being the owner of a very powerful, modern Chevy Corvette, which is always the best car you can own, he was very interested.
Yeah, no, that's fine. A moment of levity is good. Okay, so, because I understand now from my sources, I don't have an established EIU yet as Mr. Miller, but I understand that one of the the other fuel providers is actually looking at bringing in the 87 octane. So you're basically saying it's better for the cars here and better for the country as a whole long term to maintain the current standards we have as opposed to bringing in the 87 octane, because part of them they're saying is that, and I think Mr. Brown had mentioned it, that when people are comparing gas prices in Cayman versus gas prices in the US, in many cases, the lowest ones were actually the 87 octane, which we don't use, and they were not comparing likes with like. And I understand now that actually one provider is actually looking at bringing in the 87 octane, which would basically be cheaper fuel. But you're basically saying that that would be a bad idea and that they should just continue to maintain the highest standard and just basically lower their prices.
Mr. Chairman, the cost of operating a motor vehicle in the Cayman Islands is relatively low. We are completely flat because all of the roads are now surfaced. There's a very small rust problem compared to what we had in the 60s and the 70s when we were driving on the salty limestone. So operating cars here are relatively cheap. There is just a small import duty to bring the vehicles in. If we look at places like Singapore, where the import duty is higher, there's the cost of the, I think they call it certificate of entitlement. There's a number of other charges that they have. So owning and operating a vehicle in the Cayman Islands is probably the lowest of any country that I can think of, because we don't have to meet all of the standards that you meet in United States. We don't have any emission standards to comply with. And if we seek to lower the cost of owning and operating vehicles here, we are going to compound the traffic problem that we already have. The cost of individual vehicles isn't something that we need to reduce. What I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, is that we look into ways and means of reducing the cost of public transport so that the people that need to move about, the masses, would have access to cheaper mobility, but not necessarily by means of an individual car.
And you don't think that that a solution to the price of fuel is to lower the quality just to get a cheaper price? Because the committee is of the view that it is better to regulate the price and make sure that we are getting reasonable prices, as opposed to taking that option of going to a lower quality fuel simply to get a lower price.
I wouldn't be inclined to recommend a lower quality fuel, sir.
Just out of curiosity, like, what is bad about the 87 octane compared to what we have? I'm just trying to, like, what, I mean, because they're using in the States in 87, and we pretty much get the same vehicle. So their vehicle over there is using 87. We are not. I'm just trying to understand why they're using it and why we shouldn't use it here, or why it's not encouraged to be used there. Just curious.
I'm not sure how much cheaper they could actually make it, but I don't understand the difference in the cost of the fuel that we do get and the prices you have in the United States. If we talk about the more expensive fuel in the United States, then why is ours $2 more per gallon? And how much lower would you bring the 87 at? I don't think that that is, I don't quite understand the rationale behind that. I would think that transport costs, storage, logistics, and most of the storage facilities have been in place since the the sites haven't expanded greatly since they were first installed in the 1960s. And so we have very small storage facilities. I don't think we have 3 to 6 months supply available on island at any time.
The thing that threw me off, and I'm glad you're here, is specifically using Sol as an example, who I believe had 4 tanks, 2 diesel, 1 gas, and 1 jet. If they have 1 gas tank and they're selling both 89 and 93, then I have to ask the question, how is that, are these tanks compartmentalized where one is 89 or one is 93? Because the reason why I ask that, because I do know some of these guys have what they refer to as a doping system. And I think there was a company, my research had found, I think it was Octane Chemicals or one of them, that basically pushed additives in these fuel that gives them the boost. Because I strongly believe that both of them is basically bringing in the same gas. Because sometimes even the ships that arrive refuel both of them together. Because I've known there have been cases where one tanker that arrived sell to both of those guys at the same time. So they're getting the same fuel, and the only thing that's really the difference is additive. And the reason why we invited you here is because the whole argument about if we get 87 octane, we'll get cheaper fuel is crap, because at the end of the day, you're still going to be ripping us off on the margin. Because if you're ripping me on 89, you're ripping me on 93, you're sure as hell going to rip me off on 87. So that's just my polite way of putting that out there. But we wanted you to come down there to kind of explain. So going back to that then, if it's only 1 gas tank and they're selling 2 types of fuel, it's, I guess, reasonable to assume that is 1 fuel plus some additive to make it either 89 or a 93. Then the question is the fuel that's arriving here, is that really 87, which is probably the lowest, and then the additive carried to 89 and another additive carried up to 93? I'm trying to understand this, because I don't understand 1 tank or having 2 different type of fuel. Because something doesn't add up here for me.
Mr. Chairman, I do know that there, from the tanker to shore, that there is 1 anchorage, 1 submarine pipeline that comes ashore and dispenses to both distributors. But of course, that doesn't mean that their product is contaminated or one mixed with the other. And they also send the diesel, the abjet, and the gasoline through essentially the same line, but there's a system of purging the line before the product comes through. So I would think that what goes to one distributor would be purged before the other product goes. But the matter of storing 2 products in the same tank when they're single compartment tanks is a bit beyond me too. So I'm not sure of the special additives that they use. They would be industry secrets.
Yeah, and well, that goes back to my point then, because if you only have 1 tank that has gas, another tank that have jet, and 2 that run diesel, it means then that the 89 and the 93 is sitting in the same tank. And then it is a process of when you load into the truck or whatever, that some additive goes in to make 89, 89, or 89 stay 89, or 89 move to 83. But something happens along the line there, because as you just said, you can't have the 2 fuel in the same tank. So, and that's the point I'm trying to make, because then, if that is the situation, the whole idea of, well, let us do 87 is pretty much moot. Because your margin is still your margin, and just like when you charge me $2 extra on the margin you're making on 89, you're still going to charge me the same $2 extra on whatever margin you have on 87. You know what I mean? So it really comes back down to price as opposed to the different type of fuel, because we already established now that 89 and 93 is pretty much the same fuel with some additive to it. So the argument don't carry water, and that's why we actually wanted you to come down here and clarify that, but it doesn't change the fact, as we said before, still 1 tank with 2 fuel
Yeah.
can't work. So So much for that argument.
Mr. Colford, thank you very much for your time, and it has certainly been very helpful, the explanation you have given us. Have a good weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all the best to you and your committee and your deliberations.
Thank you. The committee is suspended until 1:30.